They are getting the witness.
Stay standing. Raise your right hand and face the clerk. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. State your full name. Spell your last name.
My name is Hope Charlotte Hicks, and my last name is spelled Hicks.
Give your county of residence.
Washington, D.C.
Good morning, Ms. Hicks. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Hicks. Will you please describe your educational background?
Sure, I have a BA in English from Southern Methodist University, and that's it. Very brief.
Please describe your work history after you finished college.
After college, I started working in different PR and marketing jobs. The first notable one was with a firm called Hicks Strategies, Hiltzik. And that was a PR firm that specializes in crisis communications and working with well-known individuals. After that, while I was working there, I met Ivanka Trump and started to help with public relations surrounding her personal brand. And after a little bit of time, I started to work with the Trump family on some of the Trump hospitality initiatives. And I was enjoying it so much that I was offered a position at the Trump Organization and dubbed it as the opportunity to join the company full-time.
When did you begin work at the Trump Organization full-time?
In October of 2014.
And I'm not sure you mentioned what year you received your undergraduate degree. What year was that?
I graduated from college in 2010.
You began working at the Trump Organization about 4 years after you finished college?
That's right.
And at some point, after beginning to work at the Trump Organization, did you also start working for the Trump campaign?
Yes. Shortly after I joined the Trump Organization, Mr. Trump at the time, Mr. Trump said that he would be exploring a run for president. And we began doing that in January of 2015. And then just a few months later, in March of 2015, he formed a formal exploratory committee and announced he was running as a candidate for president in June of 2015.
What do you currently do for work?
I am a communications consultant. So I have my own company. I do what I have always done, which is give advice to individuals or companies looking for strategic communications advice.
Are you here today in response to a subpoena from the district attorney's office?
I am.
Are you represented by counsel here today?
I am.
Who is paying for your lawyer?
I am.
In your current role as a consultant, is the defendant Donald Trump a client?
He's not.
Do you have any current professional relationship with Mr. Trump?
I don't.
When is the last time you were in communication with Mr. Trump?
Sometime in the fall of 2022.
2022?
Yes.
Please move a little bit forward to the microphone so we can all hear you.
Sorry.
Now, you mentioned that you began working at the Trump Organization in October of 2014. Is that right?
Yes.
What was your role at the Trump Organization?
I was the director of communications.
What were some of the tasks and responsibilities you held as director of communications at the Trump Organization?
Coordinated all of the public relations material, marketing collateral for the real estate, hospitality, and entertainment businesses, which at the time were thriving. This is very deep now that I can hear on the microphone. I apologize. It's going to take a second to get used to. I worked a lot of events, different initiatives to help publicize the various properties, the golf courses, and just the growth of the business, as well as the executives of the company, primarily Mr. Trump, Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric.
In your job as Director of Communications at the Trump Organization, did you have occasion to meet with Donald Trump?
I did.
About how often did you meet with him?
Maybe once a week at first, usually observing, colleagues working with him. And then as we transitioned just a few months later into the political work, I met with him more regularly.
As your experience at the Trump Organization grew, and as you began working on both Trump Organization matters and campaign matters, eventually, how often did you come to meet with him in a typical day?
I probably met with him every day.
And were those scheduled meetings, unscheduled meetings, or both?
Both.
Were you ever called into Mr. Trump's office when he was meeting with other people?
Yes.
Give us an example of how that might come about.
He's just the kind of person. He is a very good multitasker and a very hard worker. He is always doing many things at once. He might be having a conversation with someone, and it will remind him to follow up on something else. He'll want to share something with the group that he is meeting with and want to provide them with. Maybe if it's a political meeting, he wants to provide them with poll numbers. If it's a real estate meeting, he will want to provide them with any positive press surrounding the property, the sales of the property, the value of the property, things like that.
In this period of time, 2015, was it unusual for you to be in and out of his office during other meetings?
No.
In your role as Director of Communications, did you also speak to Mr. Trump by phone?
Yes.
About how often did you speak to him by phone?
Well, again, once the campaign work started, my role was a little bit different. If we're talking, rather than do it by title, we will do it by date, if that works for you. Beginning January 2015, I started to speak to him more regularly. I would say about June of 2015, I spoke with him on the phone every day if we weren't able to communicate in person.
How did you reach him by phone when you spoke to him?
I would usually call the office and be connected, but he had a cell phone or a home phone number as well.
Focusing on your role as Director of Communications, who did you report to at the Trump Organization?
Everybody that works there in some sense reports to Mr. Trump. It's a very big and successful company, but it's really run like a small family business in certain ways. And Mr. Trump and Don and Eric and Ivanka were very involved in the business, and so people reported to the 4 family members.
You mentioned a few names there. I want to make sure the record is clear who they are. You mentioned Don, Eric, and Ivanka. Can you say who they are?
They're Mr. Trump's children.
Is that Don Jr., Eric, and Ivanka?
Yes.
They also worked at the Trump Organization when you worked there?
Yes.
Are you familiar with someone named Keith Schiller?
Yes.
Who is Mr. Schiller?
Keith was Mr. Trump's bodyguard.
How do you know Mr. Schiller?
He attended events with us and really served as sort of a security liaison for Mr. Trump at big public events and just generally helping to keep him safe.
Through your work, did you have occasion to observe the kind of relationship that Mr. Schiller had with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How would you describe that relationship?
Close.
Are you familiar with someone named Rona Graff?
Yes.
Who is Rona Graff?
Rona was Mr. Trump's executive assistant.
How do you know her?
I worked with her during my time at the Trump Organization.
As Mr. Trump's executive assistant, what did her role involve?
She was crucial to how everything ran on the 26th floor. She had a lot of institutional knowledge about different projects and Mr. Trump's business relationships, his network, his likes and dislikes in terms of scheduling. And she also was helpful with his media engagements up to that point. She would help facilitate those media engagements for him.
You mentioned something about the 26th floor. Can you tell the jury what you mean by that?
The floor in Trump Tower where Mr. Trump's office was, and Rona's office was as well.
And in addition to what you just said, did you have occasion to observe Ms. Graff's relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How would you describe that relationship?
One of mutual respect.
Are you familiar with someone named Alan Weisselberg?
Yes.
Who is Mr. Weisselberg?
Alan was the CFO of the Trump Organization.
And by CFO, do you mean Chief Financial Officer?
Yes.
How do you know him?
I worked with him during my time there.
Can you describe a little bit what kind of work-related interactions you had with Mr. Weisselberg?
Sure. Anything that had to do with finances, Alan was involved in. You know, during this time while we were starting to work on the campaign, he was helpful in doing things like the personal financial disclosure that was required. He was helpful, you know, Mr. Trump self-financed his campaign. He would loan the campaign money. And Mr. Weisselberg Allen was helpful in that process, in making sure that we had an accurate description of that for the press.
You mentioned a required financial disclosure in that answer. Can you say a little bit more what you understood that to be?
I don't really remember that much about it. Just a requirement of candidates to file a financial disclosure, share their assets, their worth, I guess. I can't remember exactly, but I know that was something we did. We put out a press release in addition to the filing itself, and Alan was helpful with that.
Did you have occasion through your work with Mr. Weisselberg to observe his relationship with Mr. Trump?
Yes.
How would you describe that relationship?
So, mutual respect. He had been an employee at the Trump Organization for a long time, and so, you know, like Rona, he had a lot of institutional knowledge. He was a trusted person there.
Did Weisselberg report directly to Mr. Trump?
Yes.
Are you familiar with someone named Michael Cohen?
Yes.
Did Mr. Cohen work for the Trump Organization when you began working there?
Yes.
And that was around October 2014?
Yes.
Had you met Mr. Cohen before you began working at the Trump Organization?
I believe so. You know, there was about a 6 or 8 month period where I was working at a different PR firm on hotels and golf-related projects for the Trump Organization. I believe we met during that time.
What was Mr. Cohen's role at the Trump Organization?
He was an attorney.
Do you know what kind of work he did?
Not specifically, other than I know he was involved in a couple of the license deals for some of the hotel projects, and maybe some of the entertainment pieces as well, like the Miss Universe pageant.
You mentioned a minute ago that shortly after you started working at the Trump Organization, you began to work for Mr. Trump's campaign for president. Is that right?
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about how that came about?
Yes. So, Mr. Trump, one day he said, "We're going to Iowa." And I don't really know why, but after that first trip to Iowa, obviously it was clear he was exploring a potential political run. And we started to travel regularly over the next couple of weeks and months to New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Washington. He would give speeches, meet with voters, attend different panels and submit discussions, media interviews, etc. He eventually made the decision to formalize that, with an exploratory committee at first, and then announced he was going to run for president in June.
Is that June of 2015?
Yes.
Do you remember when that initial Iowa trip was?
Sometime in January of 2015.
Did there come a time that you were offered an official role in the campaign?
Yes, at some point. I think it was sometime around that first trip. Mr. Trump, I think he might have been joking, but said I was going to be the campaign press secretary. I had no experience and worked at the company, not on the campaign, so I didn't take it very seriously. But eventually I just started spending so much time working on the campaign that I became a member of the campaign team, and I was the press secretary.
Tell us a little bit about what your duties were as a press secretary for the campaign.
Sure. So just helping communicate the campaign message, a lot of work around press releases and planning events, a lot of media interviews, and just kind of being a liaison for all of those different things, and helping to facilitate anything that was external-facing for the campaign.
In addition to external communications, were there internal communications as well?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, can you describe for the jury in a little bit more detail what your interactions with the press and other campaign staff involved?
Like I said, just trying to get the message out. A lot of incoming questions about Mr. Trump, about his candidacy, where we were going to be and when, what we were speaking about. A lot of questions about his businesses. It was kind of a constant flow of incoming questions. So I managed all of those and tried to respond to everybody in a timely manner with accurate information. But yeah, that was a big part of it.
Was there also a communications team for the campaign?
At that point, no. It was just me and Mr. Trump, who is better than anybody at communications and branding.
Eventually, did the campaign add communication staff?
Later in the general election, we did have a larger staff, yes.
Did your role involve managing or leading that communication staff?
I wasn't really managing them because I was on the road every day. So I wasn't in the office sort of looking after the rest of the group. But, definitely getting guidance where I could on, daily team phone calls and other things. We worked together as a team, and there were some other people on board at that point that would stay in the office each day and look after the team.
In your role as press secretary, did you consider it important to stay informed about what other political figures were saying about Mr. Trump's candidacy?
Yes. Any news that was relevant to the campaign was consumed regularly.
And are you familiar with the term talking points? Is that a term that is used in the campaign context?
Yes.
What are talking points?
They're typically just a summary of messages in maybe a bullet point format. Maybe they're for people to remember. Kind of just like, you want to make sure everyone is on the same page about something here, the talking points about a certain topic. If you can work these into your conversations or your media interview or your next event, here they are. So they would change quite frequently. There were some, more general points, but we would update them daily based on what Mr. Trump was doing, what kind policy speeches he was giving, what kind of campaign speech he was giving.
Did you prepare or coordinate the coordination of those talking points?
Sometimes, yes.
You may already have answered this in your earlier discussion. Who did you report to as press secretary in the campaign?
Reported to Mr. Trump.
And how frequently during the campaign period in 2015 did you speak with Mr. Trump as part of your role as the press secretary?
Every day.
Did you speak by telephone?
Yes.
And in person?
Yes.
In your experience, how involved was Mr. Trump in the press aspects of his campaign?
He was very involved.
Did he weigh in on media responses?
He did.
And who on the campaign was responsible for the overall messaging strategy?
I would say that Mr. Trump was responsible. He knew what he wanted to say and how he wanted to say it, and we were all just following his lead. So, I think that he deserves the credit for, the different messages that the campaign focused on in terms of the agenda that he put forth.
Was Mr. Trump focused on press coverage of the campaign?
Yes.
And in your role as press secretary, did you often make statements on behalf of the Trump campaign?
I did.
Did you check with Mr. Trump before making statements on behalf of the campaign?
Yes.
Did you check with him before making statements about him in particular?
Absolutely.
Did you travel with Mr. Trump during the campaign?
Yes.
How often?
Almost every day.
Who else traveled with you and Mr. Trump during the campaign?
A small group of staffers.
Are there any particular staff members or types of staff people that traveled regularly?
Yes, you want me to name names?
Just give us general job functions.
Someone that output social media. Someone that helped a little bit with speech writing. And I am trying to think. There was a very small group of us. It depends where we were going. Maybe they would have someone, that was more on the fundraising end of things. The core staff was very limited, though.
Did Keith Schiller travel with Mr. Trump during the campaign?
Yes.
If someone wanted to reach Mr. Trump while he was traveling with the campaign, do you have an understanding of who they would contact?
Yeah. Mr. Trump was reachable when he wasn't doing rallies and interviews. He had a phone and he could be reached. But Keith was also helpful in facilitating phone calls.
And by Keith, you are referring to Keith Schiller?
Yes.
Did you send text messages in connection with the campaign?
Yes.
And receive text messages too?
Yes.
What phone did you use to send and receive text messages for the campaign?
The phone number.
Well, why don't you tell the jury? Did you use a personal phone or campaign phone?
It was my personal phone.
And without giving me anything other than the last 4 digits, can you let us know the last 4 digits of the phone number?
226.
Did you also make phone calls in connection with the campaign?
Yes.
Did you receive phone calls as well?
Yes.
Did you use your personal number for those campaign-related phone calls?
Yes.
And did you also send emails in connection with the campaign?
Yes.
Did you have a campaign email address?
Yes.
What was the campaign email address you used?
I think it was Hicks at donaldtrump.com.
What was the campaign email domain? jdonaldtrump.com?
I believe so, yeah.
Do you know someone named David Pecker?
Yes.
How do you know Mr. Pecker?
I know him as the publisher of American Media. It's a group of publications, and the editor of the National Enquirer. I had been introduced to him in a previous job at Hicks Strategies. I had met with him to talk about different opportunities throughout his American Media group for clients, and then I reconnected with him at some point as he was a friend Mr. Trump's.
So you were aware that Mr. Pecker and Mr. Trump had a relationship?
I knew they were friends, yes.
And how did you become aware of that relationship? How did you become aware they were friends?
I don't recall specifically, but at some point I realized that.
You testified earlier that as part of your job, you were sometimes in and out of Mr. Trump's office when he was having other meetings. Is that right?
Yes.
Were you ever in and out of his office when Mr. Pecker was meeting with Mr. Trump in Trump Tower?
I don't have a recollection of that, but it's certainly possible.
You have seen him in Trump Tower before, Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
During the campaign, were you ever present phone calls between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker?
Yes.
Can you describe those phone calls?
One of them was, I think, shortly after the National Enquirer published a piece about Ben Carson, and I just overheard a conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker, who was on speakerphone, and Mr. Trump was congratulating him on the great reporting.
What was the article about Dr. Carson about?
Medical malpractice.
Did you hear Mr. Trump say anything in particular on this phone call with Mr. Pecker?
I think he was just congratulating David on a great investigative piece. Sometimes he would say things like, "This is Pulitzer-worthy." I kind of recall vaguely that is something that he said.
Was that the only time you heard or were present for a phone call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker in this time period?
It's the most vivid recollection of everything I have. I think a similar conversation took place sometime a few months later, also just praising some of the reporting that the National Enquirer was doing. I think maybe around the time there was a story about Ted Cruz.
Do you recall what the coverage about Senator Cruz involved?
I think it was something about how his father may have been involved with Lee Harvey Oswald or something like that.
What, if anything, did you hear Mr. Trump say during that phone call?
Nothing remarkable. Just similar to what he had said the last time I had overheard a conversation. Great reporting.
At some point during the campaign, did Mr. Trump become the Republican nominee for president?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
July 19th of 2016.
And so moving forward in time from the July 2016 period to the fall, were you still press secretary for the campaign?
Yes.
Had your responsibilities changed since the beginning of the campaign?
Just a little bit because we had more people to be helpful. So there were more hands on deck. It wasn't just a solo operation. But in terms of my role with Mr. Trump, nothing had changed.
So how frequently were you interacting with Mr. Trump during this time period? Now we're in the fall of 2016.
We were traveling every day for the campaign.
Describe for the jury what a typical day was like in this time period?
Sure. So we were based here in New York, and we would usually leave Trump Tower at about 7 in the morning. We would go to LaGuardia and get on Mr. Trump's plane, and we could make, somewhere between 2 and 4. sometimes 5 stops in a day. Typically a couple of rallies and then maybe 1 or 2 other events like going to visit small business. Just getting out, meeting the voters. He was doing a lot of rallies, interviews all day, every day.
And did you typically return to New York City at the end of the day?
Yes, most of the time we did. There were some occasions where we were heading to the West Coast. It was going to make more sense to stay overnight somewhere. But most days we would come back to Trump Tower at the end of the day. You know, midnight or something like that.
Are you familiar with something that came to be known as the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
When did you first find out about the Access Hollywood tape?
It would have been in the afternoon of October 7th.
Of 2016?
Yes.
How long before the general election was that?
A month, maybe a little less than a month.
How did you first find out about it?
I received an email from the Washington Post asking for comment.
Who was the Washington Post reporter who sent you that email?
David Farenthold.
Where were you when you received it?
I was in my office on the 14th floor of Trump Tower.
Can we display just for the witness, the court and counsel, People's 218, and please display only from the middle of page 2 to the end? This is a document that has been marked as People's 218. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
The email I received.
The email you received from David Farenthold?
Yes.
Is that an exact copy of the email you received?
Yes.
Can we scroll up to display the email just from the bottom of page 1 and only showing that portion to the witness and counsel? Can we display the portion that starts forwarding message? Thank you. Do you recognize that email?
Yes.
What is it?
That is me forwarding the reporter's email to other campaign leadership.
Is that an exact copy of the email that you sent forwarding that email?
Yes.
I offer People's 218 into evidence, consisting only of the portion from the very bottom of page 1 through the end of the exhibit that I just displayed for the witness.
Subject to the objections we discussed, we have no further objection to the 205 email and the 129.
Your objection is noted. People's 218 is accepted into evidence.
Thank you. Please display for everyone the email starting on page 2. Ms. Hicks, is this the email that you just described receiving from the reporter at the Washington Post?
Yes.
When did you receive the email?
1:29 p.m.
Can we blow up the portion showing thank you? What is the subject of the email?
Urgent Washington Post query.
Can we display the third paragraph of this email beginning in the video? Can we zoom in on that portion, please? Taking a look at that paragraph that should be displayed on your screen, beginning in the video, what does the email describe?
Just a video where Mr. Trump and Billy Bush are having an inappropriate conversation about a woman.
And does Mr. Farenthold also say in this paragraph that he is sending you a transcript of the tape?
Yes, it was included in the email.
So if we can take that down, zoom out, and scroll down and enlarge the portion that begins, here's the transcript. Is that the transcript that you are referring to?
Yes.
Can you take a minute and read it just to yourself and let me know when you are done reading it?
I finished it.
Can we go to the next page, please? Can we zoom in on the first half of that page? And can you read that to yourself and let us know when you are done?
I'm good.
Okay, let me ask you, have you had an occasion to review this email before testifying today?
Yes.
Have you seen or heard the Access Hollywood tape as well?
Yes.
Does this transcript reflect the content of the tape?
Yes.
What was your first reaction when you received this? You can go ahead and take it down.
I was concerned. Very concerned. Yeah, I was concerned about the contents of the email. I was concerned about the lack of time to respond. I was concerned that we had a transcript, but not a tape. There was a lot at play.
Did you also forward the email to anyone else in the campaign?
I did.
Can we redisplay People's 218, showing only from the bottom of page 1 to the top of page 2, showing the forwarding message without showing anything before, above the forwarding, please? Is that the email that you forwarded?
Yes.
Who did you send it to?
I sent it to other campaign leadership.
Did that include Jason Miller, David Bossie?
Yes.
Can you tell us who else you sent it to?
Jason Miller, Jason, Kellyanne Conway, and Stephen Bannon.
Who is Kellyanne Conway?
She was the campaign manager.
Who is Stephen Bannon?
He was sort of a co-campaign manager.
Who is Jason Miller?
He was helping with the communications.
Who is David Bossie?
I don't know what his title was, but he was helpful, almost like a political director.
And in the email you forwarded, did you write, need to hear the tape? 1, need to hear the tape to be sure. 2, deny, deny, deny.
It's a reflex. I obviously was a little shocked and not realizing that the entirety of the transcript was in the email. So strategy number 2 was going to be a little more difficult. But yes, that is an email that I sent.
Did you mean a little more difficult because it's hard to deny a tape when there is a full transcript of it that you already have?
Objection.
Sustained.
Withdrawn. Did you do anything else after you sent that message?
I went to find the group who was on a different floor and talked to them.
What floor was the group on that you went to speak with further?
They were on the 25th floor.
Who was present when you went upstairs to the 25th floor?
Jason, Kellyanne, Stephen was there. I believe Jared Kushner was there. I believe Stephen Miller was there. Maybe Chris Christie. The whole group, they were practicing for a debate prep.
Was Jeff Sessions also present for the debate prep?
Jeff was there that day at some point. I can't remember if he was there when I went upstairs or if he came a little later. But I do remember seeing him that day.
Where on the 25th floor was the debate prep taking place?
In the conference room.
Can you tell the jury a little more about what happened when you went upstairs?
It's a glass conference room. When I get off the elevator, there is sort of a waiting area, but you can see into the conference room and everyone can see out of the conference room. So I motioned for Jason, a couple of people I sent the email to come out and speak to me, to try not to disrupt the debate prep. And obviously, the sight of the 6 of us kind of gathered, 5 or 6 of us gathered out there, was a sign that, something was afoot. And Mr. Trump asked us to come into the conference room at some point and share with him what we were discussing.
Tell the jury what happened next.
I shared the email with Mr. Trump, sort of verbally, and we were at the time, based on the conversation outside the conference room, trying to get a copy of the audio or the tape to assess the situation further. We weren't sure how to respond yet. We were kind of just trying to gather more information and everyone was observing the shock of it.
When you say you shared the content verbally, did you read Mr. Trump the email you received from Mr. Farenthold?
I read him the email and I have a vague recollection of starting to read the transcript. And then he finished reading it himself, I believe.
Did you hand him the email for him to read?
Yes, that's my recollection.
And what, if anything, did he say?
He said that didn't sound like something he would say.
Did he ask to see the actual tape?
Yes.
At some point, did Mr. Farenthold send you the actual video?
This is where it gets as little fuzzy. I can't remember if we saw the video before it was published or not. Obviously, we saw the tape in a matter of minutes, whether it was from the reporter directly or when his story posted shortly thereafter.
So at some point you saw the video. Were you with Mr. Trump when that happened?
Yes.
Was Mr. Trump upset?
Yes, he was.
Fair to say he was as mad as you've ever seen him.
Objection, Judge.
Sustained.
What was your first reaction when you heard the tape?
Just a little stunned. It's hard to describe. Yeah, it was definitely concerning, and I had, a good sense that this was going to be a massive story and sort of dominate the news cycle for the next several days at least.
Were you concerned about the effect it would have on the campaign?
Yes, it was a damaging development.
Why was it a damaging development?
It just didn't feel like the kind of story. It, obviously, wasn't helpful. But there were a lot of layers to it that complicated where we were trying to go with the campaign. This was kind of pulling us backwards in a way that was going to be hard to overcome.
In those initial conversations with Mr. Trump and other campaign staff, did anyone else the group express concern that the tape would be damaging?
Yes, I think there was consensus among us all that the tape was damaging and this was a crisis.
Were you concerned at the time about the effect that Access Hollywood tape would have on the female voters?
In that moment, no. Maybe a couple of hours later, something that crossed my mind, maybe the next day. But just trying to get your bearings in a moment like that, there is a lot going on. Not in that moment, but certainly eventually that was something that was raised.
At some point, did the conversation turn to how the campaign should respond?
Yes.
Tell the jury a little bit more about that discussion.
I don't really have a strong recollection of that conversation. But, I know Mr. Trump felt like this wasn't good. But it was also just like 2 guys talking privately, locker room talk. It wasn't anything to get so upset over. Certainly he didn't want to offend anybody, but I think he felt like this was like pretty standard stuff for 2 guys chatting with each other.
And so, as you developed an initial campaign response, did Mr. Trump have thoughts on what that initial campaign response should be?
He did. He always liked to weigh in on responses.
Did you prepare a short written statement in response?
The campaign put out a short statement. I can't remember who prepared it, but Mr. Trump definitely had input on it. We were all working together in the conference room.
Can we display for the witness, counsel, and the court only People's 313? Can you zoom in so the witness can see the middle of that page? Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is this document?
It was the first statement that we put out in response to the tape.
Is that the statement that you just mentioned as the initial response?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of that statement?
As far as I can tell, yes.
And where's the statement? Where was the statement posted?
I presume on the campaign website and any other channels.
Can you back up a little bit, please, and show us? Does that help you identify where that statement was posted?
It was on the website.
I offer People's 313 into evidence.
No objection.
People's 313 is accepted into evidence.
Please go ahead and display that publicly. Displayed. Ms. Hicks, is this the written statement that you just mentioned?
Yes.
When was it issued?
Sometime in the afternoon. If I got the query at 1:30, the story was being posted by 3:30. I think it went out sometime between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, if I had to guess.
Can you read the statement, please?
Sure. It says, "This was locker room banter, a private conversation that took place many years ago. Bill Clinton has said far worse to me on the golf course, not even close. I apologize to anyone who is offended."
Go ahead and take that down. Did you also record and release a short video later that day?
Yes, the campaign did.
That video is in evidence as People's 407.
Whereupon the referred to video was played in open court.
Pretended to be someone that I'm not. I've said and done things I regret, and the words released today on this more than a decade-old video are one of them. Anyone who knows me knows these words don't reflect who I am. I said it, I was wrong, and I apologize. I've traveled the country talking about change for America, but my travels have also changed me. I've spent time with grieving mothers who've lost their children, laid off workers whose jobs have gone to other countries, and people from all walks of life who just want a better future. I have gotten to know the great people of our country, and I've been humbled by the faith they've placed in me. I pledge to be a better man tomorrow and will never, ever let you down. Let's be honest, we're living in the real world. This is nothing more than a distraction from the important issues we're facing today. We're losing our jobs, we're less safe than we were 8 years ago, and Washington is totally broken. Hillary Clinton and her kind have run our country into the ground. I've said some foolish things, but there's a big difference between the words and actions of other people. Bill Clinton has actually abused women, and Hillary has bullied, attacked, shamed, and intimidated his victims. We will discuss this more in the coming days. See you at the debate on Sunday.
Is that the first portion of the video statement that you just mentioned?
Yes.
Did you participate in drafting or filming that statement?
I was present, yes.
Can we play the last portion of the video, please?
Whereupon the referred to video was played in open court.
Now, Ms. Hicks, does this draw distinction between his own words and the actions of other people?
Yes.
In the initial statement we just looked at, People's 313, that also referred to the Access Hollywood tape as banter?
Yes.
Is it correct that those two statements reflect Mr. Trump's understanding as to the right response strategy to the video initially?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Did you have an understanding from the written statement and the video that Mr. Trump believed it was important to distinguish between words and behavior?
I don't remember thinking that at the time, but I don't think it's incorrect.
Okay. And around that time, did you also discuss withdrawn? You mentioned that you anticipated that there would be an immediate and significant media reaction, right?
Yes.
What was the immediate media response?
It was intense. It dominated coverage for, I would say the 36 hours leading up to the debate. At the time I got the email in the office at 1:30 in the afternoon on Friday, we were anticipating a Category 4 hurricane making landfall somewhere on the East Coast. And I don't think anybody remembers where or when that hurricane made landfall. It was all Trump all the time for the next 36 hours.
The Access Hollywood pushed the hurricane off the news?
Yes.
You testified earlier that during the campaign, you stayed informed about what other political leaders were saying about Mr. Trump's candidacy. Is that right?
Yes.
Did any prominent Republicans condemn Mr. Trump's behavior on the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes.
Can you describe any of those statements that you remember?
Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney, sort of the usual. Anytime if there was anything remotely controversial, the group that felt they had to weigh in would come out and give statements. It's pretty standard. But these were particularly, sharply worded statements.
Who is Paul Ryan?
At the time, he was the Speaker of the House.
Did he disinvite Mr. Trump from a campaign event the next day in Wisconsin?
Objection.
Overruled. You can answer.
I can't remember. It's a little bit of a more nuanced response to that. I'm happy to share, but
Please.
I believe, we were still invited to attend, but sort of. The programming had changed, and it was a clear effort to distance himself from Mr. Trump with a new program schedule. So I think Mr. Trump ultimately made the decision to do something else.
Did Speaker Ryan say he was sickened by Mr. Trump's behavior?
I don't remember that, but it sounds like something he would say.
Who was Mitch McConnell at the time?
The majority leader of the Senate.
Did Senator McConnell have a public response?
He did.
What did Senator McConnell say?
Along the same lines. I don't recall exact words, but disappointed, things like that.
Would seeing anything in particular refresh your recollection as to what Senator McConnell said?
Sure.
I'm going to display for the witness, the court, and counsel the document number Danny, DNJ 00160215, which I will mark People's 5097 for identification. Can you display the first page just for this group? Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
Please advance to the third page. Let's focus on page 3.
I see it.
Okay. Does that refresh your recollection as to what Senator McConnell said?
Yes.
What did he say?
That it was repugnant and unacceptable.
Do you know, you mentioned Mitt Romney as well?
Yes.
Who was Mitt Romney at the time?
He was the Republican nominee in 2012.
And you mentioned Mr. Romney put out a statement as well.
Yes.
What was his statement?
I think something like disgraceful, disgusting, hang along those lines.
Would seeing an article refresh your recollection as Mr. Romney said?
Sure.
Can we go ahead and see that and display page 3, please? For the record, I'm showing 5090 again, just for the witness, counsel, and parties. Does that refresh your recollection as to how Mr. Romney responded?
Yes, he said it was vile.
Vile. You can go ahead and take that down, thank you. Who is John McCain?
He's a senator.
Objection, Judge.
Sustained.
Are you aware of any other prominent Republican leaders who made any other statements?
Objection.
Sustained.
You mentioned Speaker Ryan a minute ago.
Uh-huh.
At a certain point, did Speaker Ryan have a conference call with members of the House?
This was, I think, a weekly occurrence. So yes, he would have them on a weekly basis, and I believe they took place on Mondays. I could be wrong about that. But there was one Monday after the October 9th debate.
Do you have any understanding of any comments that Speaker Ryan said on that call?
I wasn't on the call.
Objection, and may I be heard at sidebar?
Yes, please approach.
Whereupon the following proceedings were held at sidebar.
I understand that there's a place for some of this type of evidence at this trial, which is why I didn't object to the first 3 or 4. My objection at this point is that it's cumulative and unduly prejudicial. So, we object to further questioning the party on public reactions to the Access Hollywood tape.
Your Honor, public reaction to the Access Hollywood tape is a critical part of the evidence in the case. We not only briefed it, but it's important to show the impact on the campaign.
I agree. I think that you've gone pretty far along on this. What do you expect to elicit from this meeting?
That the Speaker of the House told other members of the caucus that they were free to cut loose from Mr. Trump and free to endorse or not endorse as they see fit.
This is all hearsay. If we're going to probe that call, I would ask it happen outside the presence of the jurors, and they don't hear the call.
I'll sustain the objection.
Whereupon the following proceedings took place in open court.
The objection is sustained.
Did you speak to Michael Cohen around the time the Access Hollywood tape was released?
I spoke to Michael on Saturday, October 8th.
What was the substance of your conversation with Mr. Cohen?
I was calling to ask him to chase down a rumor I had heard with a contact he was familiar with in the media.
And without giving me any details at all, can you say very generally what that rumor was?
Just that there may be another tape that would be problematic for the campaign.
When you reached out to Mr. Cohen to ask for his help bringing down that rumor, were you following up in part because of the Access Hollywood tape?
Yes, of course. I didn't want anyone to be blindsided. I wanted to have an understanding of, what material was out there that we needed to prepare for.
And what, if anything, did you ask Mr. Cohen to do?
I asked him to call this friend of his and ask about the existence of the tape, and then let me know if there was, in fact, a tape, what was on it, and when we could expect it to be published.
Okay. And did Mr. Cohen follow up on that request?
I don't really remember the conversation where we closed the loop on that, but I believe he did make the phone call and, there was no such tape regardless, but he sort of chased that down for me.
In the video we just saw, did Mr. Trump mention, "We'll see you at the debate in the coming days"?
Yes.
When was that debate scheduled to take place?
Sunday, October 9th.
Was that a presidential debate?
Yes, it was the second presidential debate.
Where was it?
St. Louis.
Who were the moderators for that debate?
Anderson Cooper and Martha Radatz.
Did you travel with Mr. Trump to the debate?
Yes.
Were you present for the debate?
Yes.
Did the Access Hollywood come up during the debate?
It did, yes.
Did the moderators ask Mr. Trump about it?
They did.
And did you have an understanding from those questions whether the Access Hollywood tape was a significant campaign issue?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're asking.
Sure. Did you have withdrawn? How early in the debate discussion did the Access Hollywood tape come up?
I believe it was one of the first questions of the debate.
And when he was asked at the debate about the Access Hollywood tape, how did Mr. Trump respond?
He said that, he reiterated that this was locker room talk. Just talk. Words, not actions.
Shortly after the Access Hollywood tape was published, and without elaborating or giving any details, did you become aware of reports regarding Mr. Trump's behavior with women?
After the campaign, sorry. After the debate, I think it was the next evening, Monday evening, we were contacted by the New York Times. They were writing a story about...
Let me interrupt you there. Sorry. Were there reports regarding Mr. Trump's behavior?
After the debate, yes.
Okay. And was this around the middle of October 2016?
Yes.
So how long before the election was that?
2.5 weeks, 3 weeks.
During this period of time, in the middle of October 2016, was Mr. Trump traveling for rallies?
Yes.
Did you travel with him to those rallies?
Yes.
Did you attend a rally in Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yes.
When was that rally?
I want to say October 15th.
Did Mr. Trump give a speech at that rally?
Yes.
Let's bring up People's 409B, which is in evidence, and we'll play a short clip from that.
Whereupon an exhibit plays on the screens.
These are all horrible lies, all fabrications, and we can't let them change the most important election in our lifetimes. If 5% of the people think it's true, and maybe 10% think we don't win.
Do you recognize that event?
Yes.
Is that a video of the event in Greensboro, North Carolina?
Yes.
And are you familiar with Mr. Trump's statement on that video?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that in this period, Mr. Trump was concerned that these reports could hurt his standing with others?
Yes.
Let's, at this time in the fall of 2016, did Mr. Trump have a Twitter account?
Yes.
What was the username for that Twitter account?
@Real Donald Trump.
Did Mr. Trump post about the campaign about his 2016 run for office?
Yes.
Was that frequently?
Every day.
Did you read what Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter about the campaign?
Yes.
Did he consider Twitter an important way to communicate with voters?
Definitely.
Who was authorized to post? Withdrawn. Who was authorized to post from the @RealDonaldTrump Twitter account?
Mr. Trump. And I think there was just one other staff member that, could post things that Mr. Trump approved.
Who was that staff member?
His name is Dan Scavino.
And he was authorized to post things only with Mr. Trump's approval?
Yes.
So any language on a Twitter post in this time period is Mr. Trump's language. Either he posted or approved it?
Objection.
Overruled.
That's my understanding, yes.
We discussed earlier the response of some elected officials to the Access Hollywood tape. Do you know what Mr. Trump's reaction was to some of those incidents?
Yeah, I think he was frustrated. But again, it was not unusual to have any of those individuals speaking out and saying negative things about Mr. Trump, especially in response to, controversy. That was pretty typical.
Can we show People's 407B in evidence? We can display it to everyone. It's in evidence. Go ahead and zoom in. Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Does this tweet read, "The very foul-mouthed Senator John McCain begged for my support during his primary. I gave, he won, then dropped me over locker room remarks"?
Yes.
What does "then drop me over locker room remarks" refer to?
I think it means he withdrew his endorsement after that Access Hollywood tape.
You can take that down. Did Mr. Trump also post statements on Twitter regarding reports of his behavior that we discussed?
Yes.
Can we show People's 407C in evidence, please? Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Can you please read what Mr. Trump said in the tweet?
Nothing ever happened with any of these women. Totally made up nonsense to steal the election. Nobody has more respect for women than me.
Take that down. Can we just play People's 407D in evidence? You can zoom in. Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Can you please read what Mr. Trump said in this tweet?
Polls close. But can you believe I lost large numbers of women voters based on made-up events that never happened? Media rigging election.
Take that down. One more. Can we show People's 407 in evidence and zoom in for the witness? Are you familiar with this tweet?
Yes.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yes.
Can you please read what Mr. Trump said in this tweet?
Can't believe these totally phony stories. 100% made up by women, many already proven false and pushed big time by press, have impact.
Have you ever heard of someone named Karen McDougall?
Yes?
When did you first hear the name Karen McDougall?
November 4th, 2016.
And in what context did you first hear the name Karen McDougall?
I received an inquiry from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Asking questions about her and, the National Enquirer.
Who was the reporter you heard from?
Michael Rothfeld.
Have you ever heard of someone named Stormy Daniels?
She was mentioned in the same story, the November 4th, 2016 story. And I had heard of her one other time before that.
What's the other time before that you had first heard Stormy Daniels?
A year prior, November 2015. Mr. Trump and some security guys on the plane were telling a story about a celebrity golf tournament and some of the participants in the tournament, and her name came up. She was there with one of the other participants that Mr. Trump had played with that day, was my understanding of the story.
Where were you during that conversation?
We were on one of Mr. Trump's planes.
Now, you mentioned that you first heard of Karen McDougall when the Wall Street Journal reached out about an article that you said was being published. Is that right?
Uh-huh.
Where were you when you first heard about the potential article of the Wall Street Journal?
Also on Mr. Trump's plane. I think we had just landed in Ohio, and Mr. Trump was going to get off the plane and do a hangar rally where, we don't travel anywhere. He just does a rally on the tarmac of the airport sometimes, with the airport hangar as a cover for the audience. So we just landed in Ohio. He was going to go start the rally. And I had received the email just as we were landing.
You mentioned an email. Is that how Mr. Rothfeld contacted you?
Yes.
What did you learn from that email about the story he was reporting about?
I think it outlined that there was a woman named Karen McDougall who had a story, that was purchased by the National Enquirer but was never published. And, he was asking if we, the Trump campaign, or Mr. Trump knew anything about that.
Can we show for the witness, counsel, and the court only the document that's been marked People's 316, please? Take a look at that document and let me know if you recognize it.
I do.
What is this document?
The original email to me. My response asking the reporter to hold, saying that, I just got his email.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Before you tell me the substance, can you just describe what this is, that the display on the screen is, without reading any content, please?
Oh, it's just an inquiry, a press inquiry.
Is this the email from Mr. Rothfeld to you?
Yes.
That you received on November 4th?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of the email messages that you sent and received?
Yes.
I offer People's 316 into evidence.
No objection.
316 is accepted into evidence.
Please go ahead and display 316 publicly. Now, Ms. Hicks, you can describe the email. Is this the email you mentioned receiving on November 4th?
Yes.
Let's blow up the middle of the page, starting with the line where Mr. Rothfeld's name appears. If you need a minute, go ahead and read that.
Do you want me to read it out loud?
No, just read it to yourself, please. Can we highlight the first paragraph? Is this withdrawn? You testified that the first time you heard the name Karen McDougall was when a reporter from the Wall Street Journal mentioned it. Is that right?
That's right.
Is this the message that you're referring to?
Yes.
And that's the reference to Karen McDougall? That's the first time that you heard her name?
Yes.
Who was with you when you received the email?
Again, a small number of people in the plane, and most of them deplane very quickly to get to the rally. So I was sort of dealing with this by myself on the plane while the rally was taking place.
Okay. Did you tell Mr. Trump about this inquiry from the Wall Street Journal before he began speaking at the rally?
I believe I did, yes. Just because I was worried about not having enough time to respond while he was speaking. So I did let him know that we had received an inquiry. And that I was going to try to chase down some answers.
After that, what did you do to chase down some answers?
I believe I forwarded the email to Jared Kushner. I wanted to loop him in because he was sort of overseeing a lot of the campaign operations at this point. And 2, he had a very good relationship with Rupert Murdoch, and I was hoping to see if we could buy a little extra time to deal with this.
Let's go ahead and take down People's 316. Can you display People's 317 just to the witness, counsel, and the court? Take a look at the top part of that email. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's my forwarding the reporter inquiry to Jared, like I just said.
Is this an exact copy of the email message that you sent?
Yes.
I offer People's 317 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Please display that exhibit publicly. So, let me direct your attention first to the first message in the chain. Is this the same incoming message from the Wall Street Journal reporter that we saw in the last exhibit?
It looks the same, yes.
Now, directing your attention to the top of the chain, if we can blow that up, does this show that you forwarded the email to Mr. Kushner?
Yes.
And that's the forward that you just described?
Yes.
Did you also call Mr. Kushner after sending the email?
I did.
What did you discuss?
Just what I had already described. Let him know about it and asked if he thought that, it was a worthwhile endeavor to reach out to Rupert Murdoch, who's the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, to see if we could buy a little extra time.
What, if anything, did Mr. Kushner say to you in response?
I think he said that he wasn't going to be able to reach Rupert, and that we should just work out responding and dealing with it.
We can go ahead and take that exhibit down. You mentioned you did some other follow-up with regard to this inquiry from Mr. Rothfeld, right?
Yes.
What else did you do?
I believe I called Michael Cohen, because I know he had a relationship with Mr. Pecker, and I wanted to see if he knew anything about this.
Did you call anybody else?
I believe I called Mr. Pecker's office as well, to let them know that we had gotten this inquiry, and we obviously didn't know anything about it, and tried to get an understanding of what was going on.
So let's take those in turn. When you called Mr. Pecker's office, did you ultimately reach him?
I believe so.
And what did you speak with him about?
Just asked what was going on. Why was I receiving this email? And he explained that, Karen McDougall was paid for magazine covers and fitness columns, and that it was all very legitimate, that's what the contract was for.
That's what Mr. Pecker explained to you on November 4th when you called him?
That's right.
Had you had discussions with Mr. Pecker before that date having anything to do with Karen McDougall?
Never.
You also mentioned you reached out to Michael Cohen, is that right?
Yes.
Did you end up speaking with him?
Yes. I believe I spoke with Michael before I spoke to Mr. Pecker.
And what did Mr. Cohen say?
I don't really remember. But there was a reason I called David next. I think Michael sort of feigned like he didn't know what I was talking about and that we should connect with David to get more information.
Did you begin drafting a response from the campaign to respond to the Wall Street Journal reporter?
I did.
Did you share that draft response with anyone before sending it to the Wall Street Journal?
I sent it to Michael first, just to get his input, while Mr. Trump was still on stage. And then, when Mr. Trump came on the plane from the rally, I shared it with him as well.
And when you say you shared it with him as well, you're referring to sharing it with Mr. Trump as well?
Yes.
After you sent it to Mr. Cohen, is that right?
Yes.
Let's display just for the witness, counsel, and the court, a document marked for identification as People's 318. Once you review that, let me know if you recognize that document.
Yes, I recognize it.
I'm sorry, you said you recognize the document?
I do.
What is it?
It's a draft statement sent to Michael, and Michael's response back with his edited version.
Is this an exact copy of the email message you sent and received?
Yes.
People's 318 into evidence.
No objection.
318 accepted into evidence.
Let's display that for everybody. And let's zoom in on the initial message at the bottom of the page. Can you tell the jury what this message shows?
These are draft responses that I shared with Michael.
And you sent this from your campaign email account to Mr. Cohen at the Trump Organization. Is that right?
Yes.
And now let me direct your attention to the top of the page. Let's zoom in on Mr. Cohen's reply. Can you go ahead and read what Mr. Cohen said in response?
He suggested that, say these accusations are completely untrue and just the latest despicable attempt by the liberal media and the Clinton machine to distract the public from the FBI's ongoing criminal investigation into Secretary Clinton and her closest associates.
After sending this draft message to Mr. Cohen and getting his response, did you speak to him further about it?
I don't remember, but I'm sure that we did speak.
You mentioned after the rally you also spoke to Mr. Trump about the potential statement. Is that right?
Yes.
Tell us about that conversation.
He wanted to have an understanding of what was going on as well. I believe we called Mr. Pecker's office back. I was relaying what Mr. Pecker had said to me about this being, a legitimate contract for a woman that was going to provide them content, magazine content, and he wanted to hear that from David as well. And so, I believe I have a recollection of us calling David repeating that to Mr. Trump. And sometime after that conversation, Mr. Trump he didn't want to use the statements that we had drafted. He wanted to draft his own statement.
And so, in that conversation you just testified about, he wanted to hear what Mr. Pecker's statement to the Wall Street Journal would be?
He wanted to have an understanding of what David had told me previously.
Did that include what Mr. Pecker told you about what the explanation would be?
It included his explanation for that this was a legitimate contract, and that's what they planned to tell the Journal.
You said Mr. Trump then had input into the statement, is that right?
Yes.
Did he ask you to include anything in the comment to the reporter?
I think we changed the statement not to include almost any of what you just saw, and it was just a denial of the accusations and a statement that they were totally untrue and that we didn't know anything about this deal.
Going back to the email you received from the Wall Street Journal reporter, did it mention any other women in addition to Karen McDougall?
The story was also going to mention Stephanie Clifford, Stormy Daniels, one and the same.
So you understand Stephanie Clifford and Stormy Daniels to be the same person?
Yes.
How did you come to learn that this story would also mention Stormy Daniels?
The reporter told me on the phone.
Did you then, after learning that Stormy Daniels would be in the story, did you have any discussions with Mr. Cohen about Stormy Daniels?
I believe I did. I'm very fuzzy about this point, but I believe I spoke to him.
Did you mention to Mr. Trump that Stormy Daniels would be mentioned in the story?
Yes.
What, if anything, did he say when you told him that Stormy Daniels would be mentioned in the Wall Street Journal story?
He wanted to know the context, and he wanted to make sure that there was a denial of any kind of relationship.
And did you believe that denying the existence of a relationship was responsive to the reporting?
I felt the point of the story was that the National Enquirer paid a woman for her story and never published it. It wasn't necessarily about accusations of, certain behavior.
Is this a good time to break?
Yes, Your Honor.
Let us take our lunch recess at this time. Jurors, I remind you, please, not to talk among yourselves or anyone else about anything related to the case. Please continue to keep an open mind as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. Please do not form or express an opinion as to the defendant's guilt or innocence. And please remember all of the admonitions that I've given to you. Enjoy your lunch.
All rise, whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are excused.
You may be seated. Thank you, Ms. Hicks. You may step down.
Whereupon the witness is excused.
Is there anything you would like to go over?
No, Judge, thank you.
Nothing for the people.
Enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Whereupon a luncheon recess is taken. Whereupon the case is recalled in the afternoon session. Continuing case on trial, People v. Donald J. Trump. All parties are present.
Good afternoon. Should we bring the witness out?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let's bring the witness, please.
Witness entering.
Good afternoon, Ms. Hicks. Remember that you're still under oath. Let's get the jury, please.
All rise, jury entering. Whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are present and properly seated. Continuing case on trial, People v. Donald J. Trump. All parties and all jurors are present.
Mr. Colangelo.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Hicks. Before lunch, we were talking about an inquiry you got from Michael Rothfeld at the Wall Street Journal. Do you remember that discussion?
Yes.
And I believe we were discussing a request from Mr. Trump that you included the denial of any relationship with Stormy Daniels in your response to the Wall Street Journal. Do you remember that?
With both of the women who were mentioned in the story, yes.
Thank you. Did you get back in touch with the reporter, Mr. Rothfeld, at that point, to convey the denial of any relationship with Stormy Daniels?
I did.
Around this time on November 4th, did you witness any phone conversations between Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen?
I believe I heard Mr. Trump speaking with Mr. Cohen shortly after the story was published.
Did you?
In addition to the phone calls that I described earlier.
Okay, thank you. And when you observed Mr. Trump and Mr. Cohen speaking after the story was published, did you participate in that conversation?
No, we were in our car on our way to a rally venue.
Tell the jury a little bit more about how that came to be.
We had landed. After Ohio, we flew to, I think, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so we were getting in cars at the airport to travel to the next event venue. And I don't know who initiated the phone call. I just remember Mr. Trump was speaking to Michael during that car ride, and Reince Priebus was also in the car.
And did you hear either side of that conversation?
I presumably heard Mr. Trump. There was nothing memorable. I don't remember anything that was said, so...
And you said this was on after the plane had landed in Pennsylvania, after leaving the Ohio event where you had been earlier that day?
Yes.
Do you remember where you started the day that morning on November 4th?
I want to say Maine.
So was Ohio your first stop of the day or one of several stops?
No, one of several stops.
And earlier, when you talked about a typical day for you, you mentioned that some days had multiple stops, some days had fewer. Is that right?
Yes.
Did your mornings depend on how many stops you had that day and where you needed to get to?
Yeah. So if we had more stops, we typically left earlier in the day to account for additional travel and, You know, maybe another rally, maybe another campaign stop of some kind. If we had to do like 2 or 3, which was pretty much the average, we might start a little later. So get to the office around 7, but not leave for the airport until a little later that morning.
Okay. So there were days you left early in the morning and days you wouldn't leave until mid-morning or later in the day.
Mid-morning, I would say, yeah.
That was throughout the fall of 2016?
Yeah, it's hard to generalize. Every day was different, but basically, yes.
Now going back to your interactions with Mr. Rothfeld, did the Wall Street Journal later publish the story they contacted you about?
Yes?
Let's bring up People's 180 in evidence. We can display that for everyone. Do you have that on your screen?
Yes.
Is this the article that Michael Rothfeld contacted you about?
Yes.
So this is the article reporting that AMI and David Pecker purchased the rights to a story from Karen McDougall, but never published it.
Yes.
Did you read the Wall Street Journal story when it was first published?
Yes.
Around what time was the article published online?
Sometime in the evening, 6, 7, I can't say when.
Let me direct your attention to the middle of page 2 of this article. I would like to highlight a response starting with Hope Hicks, a campaign spokeswoman. Do you see that?
I see it.
Can you go ahead and read that highlighted passage into evidence, please, into the record?
Sure. It says, Hope Hicks, a Trump campaign spokeswoman, said of the agreement with Ms. McDougall, quote, "We have no knowledge of any of this. She said that Ms. McDougall's claim of an affair with Mr. Trump was totally untrue."
And that statement that you just read, does that accurately reflect the statement that you gave to the Wall Street Journal?
Yes?
Did Mr. Trump tell you to say, "We have no knowledge of any of this"?
I don't remember him, verbatim saying that, but that was the consensus of the conversations that we were all having, that the campaign wasn't aware of this agreement that AMI had with Ms. McDougall. But my recollection is that this is what was told to me, and that's why it was provided as a statement.
Is it your recollection that this was told to you by Mr. Trump?
Certainly that any claims of an affair were totally untrue. Yes, that's what was told to me. I don't have a strong memory of him saying verbatim, "We have no knowledge of any of this." So I just don't want to say that. I don't want to say that that's what he said, because I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember giving grand jury testimony as part of the district attorney's investigation in this proceeding?
Yes.
Would reviewing your grand jury testimony refresh your recollection as to what Mr. Trump told you to say in parts of that response?
Perhaps.
Can we show what's marked for identification, People's 509H, and display that just to the witness, the court, and counsel? Page 685 from that part. Take a look at that, Ms. Hicks, and let me know when you've had a chance to review it.
Yes, I see it.
And does that refresh your recollection as to the source of the information that you gave to the Wall Street Journal?
No. Like I said, the denial was from Mr. Trump for both women. And that's very clear. The part that I'm unsure about is that he said, "We have no knowledge of any of this," directly. So I want, and this doesn't clarify that for me.
Give me 1 second. Take a look at the last 3 lines of this page.
Objection, Judge.
Overruled.
And let me know when you finish reading it.
I see what I said. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just telling you, as I sit here now, I don't have a strong memory of him saying to me, "Say we have no knowledge of any of this." I know very clearly that he stated the denials and wanted to be certain words were included. These are hectic conversations. There's a lot of people weighing in. I just want to say something definitively that I can't remember as I sit here right now. Sorry.
We can take that down. Let's go back to People's 180, please. Can you display the middle of page 4? Let's blow up the passage. This can go to everybody. Do you see the passage that's being displayed?
Yes.
Does that read, "Mr. Davidson also represented Stephanie Clifford, a former adult film star whose professional name is Stormy Daniels, and who was in discussions with ABC's Good Morning America in recent months, publicly disclosed what she said was a past relationship with Mr. Trump, according to people familiar with the talks. Ms. Clifford cut off contact with the network without telling her story. She didn't respond to requests for comment. An ABC spokesperson declined to comment on Ms. McDougall or Ms. Clifford. The Trump spokeswoman, Ms. Hicks, said it was absolutely, unequivocally untrue about that Stormy Daniels had a relationship with Mr. Trump. Do you see that statement?
Yes.
Does it accurately reflect what you said to the Wall Street Journal?
Yes. And it also accurately reflects what I said in the grand jury, that what I told to the Wall Street Journal was told to me.
Did Mr. Trump tell you to say to the Wall Street Journal that the relationship with Stormy Daniels was absolutely, unequivocally untrue?
Yes.
Did you, after the story was published, were you in contact with Mr. Cohen about the story?
Yes.
And did you text each other about the story?
Yes.
Let's display People's 259, which is in evidence. We can show everybody. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a catalog of text messages between myself and Michael Cohen during this time period.
Can you identify the dates that these text messages include?
November 4th and 5th of 2016.
Let me direct your attention to the first 3 text messages on the cell. What do these messages show?
I'm sorry. These are from Michael to me?
Correct, yes.
Well, sorry. I'm just making sure that's what it is.
Are they from Michael to you?
Yes.
And what do these messages show?
Michael asking me to call him. Michael asking for updates throughout the evening of the 4th.
Is that sometime between 7 o'clock and 9 p.m.?
Yes.
What did you understand him to be asking about in these texts?
We had landed. After Ohio, we flew to, I think, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so we were getting in cars at the airport to travel to the next event venue. And I don't know who initiated the phone call. I just remember Mr. Trump was speaking to Michael during that car ride, and Reince Priebus was also in the car.
Let me address your attention to the next several texts on this page. Let's see if we can blow up the next 6. What does the first text in this chain show?
It shows me sending the story to Michael, which was at 9:55 p.m.
As you sit here today, do you have a memory as to how close in time the story was published online? You sent a link to Mr. Cohen?
I don't, I'm sorry.
What was Mr. Cohen's response when you sent it to him?
He said, lots of innuendos with little fact.
Can you read the next message as well?
Poorly written and I don't see it getting much play.
Did you understand him to mean, I don't see it getting much play?
I did. Just a little irony there.
How did you respond?
I said, I agree with most of that, but that it will get play because the media is the worst, but he should just ignore and blow past it. And by he, I meant Mr. Trump.
And did the text exchange regarding the Wall Street Journal article continue the next morning?
Yes, it did.
Let's go ahead and display the last 2 messages. Can you describe for the jury what these messages show?
Michael saying that he's only seen 6 additional stories about the Wall Street Journal piece, and that it was getting little to no traction, and that he concurred.
How did you respond?
Yes, I responded.
I'm sorry, can you let me know how you responded?
Oh, I wrote, same, that I was seeing the same.
Let's take a look at the next page and show the top 3 messages. Can you describe to the jury what this shows?
That is a text message from me to Michael, asking him to keep praying because this was obviously the reason why there were only 6 stories. And he wrote back saying that even CNN wasn't talking about it. No one believes it. And if necessary, I have a statement by Storm denying everything and contradicting the other porn star's statement. I wouldn't use it now or even discuss with him as no one is talking about this or cares. And I responded, agree.
Can you describe what you understood getting little to no traction to mean?
It wasn't being picked up in the same way as something like the Access Hollywood tape was. It wasn't wall-to-wall coverage.
And in the message on the middle of your screen right now, there's a note from Mr. Cohen stating he has a message from Storm.
I see it.
What do you understand that to mean?
I don't know.
Do you have any understanding at all?
I mean, I can guess. But when I say I don't know, I don't believe at the time I received that message that I had the necessary context to totally understand what he was talking about. But it wasn't, I just wanted to move to the next thing. It wasn't obviously I didn't follow up and say, wait, what are you talking about? What statement? I didn't know what he was talking about and I didn't want to know. So I understand what I believe he's implying, which is that I had a statement from Stormy Daniels saying there was no affair, therefore no story to shop.
And when you say you didn't know and you didn't want to know, what do you mean by that?
The election was taking place in 3 days, and we were doing 5 or 6 rallies a day. There was a lot going on. And, it wasn't like this story was consuming the news cycle and that I needed to be, aware of every little detail. I just kind of was hoping at this point we were just going to blow past it and keep going.
Let's take that down and show the rest of the messages on this page. Ms. Hicks, were you in touch with Mr. Cohen again later that day on November 5th?
Yes.
Can you describe the text exchange that follows?
I've texted Michael, and I asked him for David Pecker's cell phone number, and I said, I have it, but Mr. Trump thinks it's the wrong number. He sent me David's phone number, and I said, that's the same one that I have. Thanks. And Michael reiterated, he sent a different phone number and said, he called me from this phone number this morning. I believe meaning Mr. Pecker. And I replied at some point and said that they had already spoken and it was all good.
Why did you ask Mr. Cohen for David Pecker's phone number?
Mr. Trump wanted to speak to him.
When you say they spoke, all good, what does that refer to?
They spoke. The all good means, I don't need your help anymore. They spoke. It's all good.
Meaning Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker?
Yes?
Were you present for the phone call between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pecker on the 5th?
I wasn't, no.
What was the response overall to the Wall Street Journal article?
It was sort of muted. All relative compared to some of the other stories we dabbled during the campaign, but it didn't get a lot of traction.
After it was published and on November 5th, did you discuss the article with Mr. Trump?
I did.
What, if anything, did you discuss?
He was concerned about the story. He was concerned how it would be viewed by his wife. And he wanted me to make sure that the newspapers weren't delivered to their residence that morning.
Did he also ask you whether you thought it was likely to affect the campaign?
Everything we talked about in the context of, this time period was about whether or not there was an impact on the campaign. So certainly I don't recall specifically him saying that. But everything was something that Mr. Trump said a lot is, how is it playing? He wanted to know how things were playing, whether they were playing well or playing poorly. And that could have been a speech, an article, a tweet. So I don't want to speculate, but I'm almost certain he would have asked me, how's it playing? And wanted to know how I felt the next few days were going to go, and if this was going to be a big piece of the next few days.
After the election in November, and before the inauguration in January 2017, did you have a role on the presidential transition?
I did.
What was that role?
I don't actually know. I think it was just an extension of what I was doing on the campaign.
And did you later join the Trump administration as a White House employee?
I did.
When did you start working in the White House?
January 20th, 2017.
How long did you work in the White House?
I worked there until, April 1st of 2018. I left, and then I came back in March of 2020, and left in January of 2021.
In between April of 2018, when you left the White House the first time, and March of 2020, when you returned, where did you work?
I worked at the Fox Corporation.
What was your role at the Fox Corporation at that time period?
I was the Executive Vice President of Communications.
So, going back to your first period of White House employment, what was your position when you joined in January 2017?
When I first joined, I was the Director of Strategic Communications.
What were your responsibilities as the Director of Strategic Communications?
Similar to the campaign, I worked closely with the communications team and the press team on message development and organizing events to help showcase Mr. Trump's accomplishments, the agenda of the administration. I worked closely with Mr. Trump on media opportunities for him. Yeah.
And in that role, did you speak regularly with Mr. Trump?
I did.
You mentioned that was your first role in the White House. Did you later get another position in the White House in that first period of employment?
Yes. Eventually, I became the communications director.
When did your job change from Director of Strategic Communications to Communications Director?
I think in August of 2017.
When you first started working in the White House in that January, where was your desk located?
In the outer Oval Office, right outside the Oval.
Can you describe for the jury what the outer Oval Office is?
Sure. It's like a reception area. There's 2 desks for 2 assistants. And then there's like a small vestibule that was a coat closet and had like a mini fridge and a coffee station in it. And yeah, that's the outer oval. It's a very small space. Very small.
And you mentioned there was another desk there. Who sat at the second desk when you first started working at the White House?
Madeline Westerhout.
Who's Madeline Westerhout?
Madeline was Mr. Trump's executive assistant once we got to the White House.
What were Madeline Westerhout's responsibilities when you started working there?
She just looked after Mr. Trump's needs. Worked with various team members on his schedule. Kept his call logs. Took his messages. Worked with him in correspondence. She is, a very good executive assistant.
I think I asked you what your responsibilities were as Director of Strategic Communications. Can you describe what your job responsibilities were when you became the Communications Director?
Sure. So it changed just a little bit to, instead of working with the team, sort of overseeing the team, and just coordinating all of the communication efforts for the administration from the White House throughout all of the agencies, and making sure that each of principals of the agencies and the agencies themselves were prioritizing Mr. Trump's agenda, and that we were all working together to maximize the impact of any positive messages that we were trying to get out and share with the American people. And, capitalize on any opportunities to showcase Mr. Trump and his work, the president in a good light.
In that role as communications director, did you continue to speak regularly with Mr. Trump?
I did.
How often did you speak?
Every day.
Now, did there come a time during your White House employment that the Karen McDougall story resurfaced?
In January of 2018, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal. Not so much about Karen McDougall, but it was about Stormy Daniels.
I'll ask you about that story in a second. Let me ask you first. Are you aware that at some point while you were in the White House, that Karen sued AMI to be released from her non-disclosure agreement?
Objection.
Overruled.
I recently had my memory refreshed about that.
So are you aware that that happened?
Yes.
Do you know the date of that lawsuit?
I want to say March 20th.
Of what year?
2018.
I'm going to show just you, I'll show the court and counsel, a document that's been marked People's 319. People's 319. Do you recognize this document?
Yes.
What is it?
It's a text message with myself and Madeleine Westerhout.
Did your attorney produce this text exchange to the district attorney's office in response to a subpoena?
Yes.
Is this an exact copy of text messages that you sent and received?
Yes.
I offer People's 319 into evidence.
No objection.
Accepted into evidence.
Let's display 319 to everyone, please. Let's zoom in on the top of the screenshot. Can you let the jury know what that says?
It says Madeleine.
And what initials does it show?
MW.
I think you testified that these are texts with Madeleine Westerhout. Yes?
Yes.
Let's scroll down to the bottom of the text message, please. Just the last message showing the date. What is the date of this text message?
Tuesday, March 20th, 2018.
And is this a message from Ms. Westerhout to you?
Yes.
What does that message say?
It says, "Hey, the president wants to know if you called David Pecker again."
I think you testified that March 20th was the same day that Karen McDougall sued American media regarding her NDA agreement.
Yes.
Did you speak to Mr. Pecker that day?
I have no recollection of speaking to David.
You have no memory of that one way or the other?
I don't believe I called him, but I don't know. I don't have a memory of it.
So are you saying it didn't happen, or you just don't know one way or the other?
Objection.
Overruled.
I don't know one way.
And shortly after filing that lawsuit, did Ms. McDougall give an interview to Anderson Cooper on CNN?
Yes.
Do you remember when she gave that interview?
March 24th.
So it was
March 22nd.
sometime not long after the exchange we just described?
Yes.
Within a couple of days?
Seems like it, yeah.
Were you aware of that interview when it happened?
Yes.
Did you watch the interview?
Yes.
After Ms. McDougall went on Anderson Cooper, did you have any discussions with Mr. Trump and David Pecker about that interview or about the AMI deal?
I have no recollection of speaking to Mr. Pecker after that interview.
Okay. I'll ask the same question I asked before. Are you saying you don't know one way or the other whether it happened?
I don't believe that happened.
So, your testimony is you didn't speak to them after the interview?
To my knowledge, I did not speak to Mr. Pecker. To be clear, I did speak to Mr. Trump. I was the communications director. This was a major interview. Yes, we just spoke about the news coverage of the interview, how it was playing out. But I don't recall him mentioning Mr. Pecker in those conversations or having a conversation with Mr. Pecker.
And when did you testified that you left the White House after an initial period of, when was that relative to the events I just described?
5 days later.
Did there come a time during your White House employment that the Stormy Daniels story surfaced?
Yes.
When was that?
January 12th, 2018.
Describe how you learned that the story was coming back.
I can't remember exactly, but, someone, either myself or another press communications team member, got an inquiry from the same reporter, Michael Rothfeld, of the Wall Street Journal, describing a story they planned to publish that, Stormy Daniels, who was a footnote in the November 4th story from the previous year, had in fact received a payment of $130,000.
So you first heard about it before the story was posted, and later the article was published, right?
Yes.
When you first heard about it, did you speak to Michael Cohen about the girls from the Wall Street Journal?
I can't remember.
You have no recollection of it, especially with Mr. Cohen at all.
Sitting here right now, no. But if you have anything to refresh my memory...
Let's show the document just to counsel, the court, and the witness that I previously marked for identification as 509H. Let's go to page 703. Go ahead and review that and let me know when you're finished.
So this helped. Thank you. Do.
Please go ahead and let me know.
Sorry. When you were asking the question, I was thinking sequentially, like right when the story came out. I believe I think the 12th was a Friday night. I'm not positive. Maybe Thursday or Friday night. And I don't remember speaking to Michael right then. But at some point in the aftermath of that story, I spoke to him about it. And I do remember that.
What do you remember about that conversation?
I remember Michael just, saying that this wasn't true, that no payment had been made, and that he had a statement from Stormy Daniels, either personally or her attorney, stating that no relationship had transpired.
And
that he had documentation to prove that no payment had been made.
I think you testified a minute ago that you also discussed this story with Mr. Trump. Is that right?
Yes.
And what did you discuss with Mr. Trump?
Just how to respond to the story, how he would like a team to respond to the story.
Did you relay to him the substance of the conversation you had with Mr. Cohen?
I don't recall the sequencing, and I believe I spoke to Mr. Cohen after I spoke to Mr. Trump.
Let's bring up People's 181 in evidence. This can be displayed to everybody. Is this the article we were just discussing?
Yes.
Let me direct your attention to the second page of the article. Let's look at the third paragraph, please.
I see it.
Can you go ahead and read that third paragraph, please?
It says, "These are old recycled reports, which were published and strongly denied prior to the election," a White House official said, responding to the allegation of a sexual encounter involving Mr. Trump and Ms. Clifford. The official declined to respond to questions about an agreement with Ms. Clifford. It isn't known whether Mr. Trump was aware of any agreement or payment involving her.
Are you the White House official quoted in the story?
No, I'm not.
Who was the White House official quoted in the story?
I can't say for sure. But I think that it was, Hogan Gidley. He was the deputy press secretary.
And as the communications director at the time, withdrawn, did you discuss this statement with Mr. Trump before it was issued?
Yes.
To your knowledge, did Mr. Trump communicate directly with Mr. Cohen about these reports that Stormy Daniels was paid $130,000 a month before the election to stay silent about her allegations?
I only know of one instance where they communicated directly with one another, but I can't say about other than that.
And for the one instance that you know of, when did that conversation take place?
Sometime in the middle of February.
How did you learn about it?
Mr. Trump told me about it.
And can you describe the conversation that you had with him about the conversation he had with Mr. Cohen?
I believe it was the day after, the morning after Michael had given a statement to the New York Times, saying that he had, in fact, made this payment, without Mr. Trump's knowledge. And, so Mr. Trump was saying that he had spoken to Michael. This President Trump was saying he spoke to Michael, and that Michael had paid this woman to protect him from a false allegation, and that, Michael felt like it was his job to protect him, and that's what he was doing. And he did it out of the kindness of his own heart. He never told anybody about it, And he was continuing to try to protect him up until the point where he felt he had to state what was true.
And this is what President Trump told you Michael Cohen said to him?
That's right.
How long had you known Michael Cohen by that point?
3.5 years.
And did the idea that Mr. Cohen would have made a $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels out of the kindness of his heart, was that consistent with your interactions with him up to that point?
Objection.
Overruled.
I would say that would be out of character for Michael.
Why would it be out of character for Michael?
Objection.
Overruled.
I didn't know Michael to be an especially charitable person, or selfless person. He's the kind of person who seeks credit.
Did Mr. Trump say anything else about this issue when he told you that Michael made the payment?
Just that he thought it was a generous, thing to do, and he was appreciative of the loyalty. That's all I remember.
Did he say anything about the timing of the news reporting regarding...
Yes. He wanted to know how it was playing, and just my thoughts and opinion about this story versus having the story, a different kind of story before the campaign had Michael not made that payment. And I think Mr. Trump's opinion was it was better to be dealing with it now, and that it would have been bad to have that story come out before the election.
Thank you. No further questions.
Your witness.
Thank you. May I inquire?
You may.
Ms. Hicks, I want to start by talking a little bit about your time at the Trump Organization, if that's okay.
Yes.
I think you said you started around October of 2014?
Yes.
Sorry.
It's okay.
And your initial title was Director of Communications?
Yes.
And that was a position that the Trump Organization created to bring you in, right?
Yes.
And I think you said this morning that you focused on real estate, hospitality, and entertainment. That was your portfolio there?
Yes. Crying. Sorry. Crying. Could I just have a minute?
Of course.
Sorry.
Judge, maybe we could take a break?
Ms. Hicks, do you need a break?
Yes, please. Crying.
Jurors, let's take a few minutes.
All rise, whereupon the jurors and the alternate jurors are excused,
You can step down.
whereupon the witness is excused, whereupon a recess is taken. Remain seated.
Let's get Ms. Hicks back, please.
Witness entering courtroom, jury entering courtroom.
Please be seated.
Jury is properly seated. Do all parties confirm?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Bove.
Thank you, Judge. If you need a minute, just let me know. We were talking about the Trump Organization, and I think you said this morning that it ran a little bit like a family business while you were there.
Yes?
You met the family, correct?
Yes.
President Trump's children, right?
Yes.
His wife.
Yes.
And you were interacting with President Trump regularly early on in your time at the Trump Organization, correct?
Yes?
And you felt that you had his trust and respect?
His trust and respect, yes.
You met some of his staff, his other staff, right?
Yes.
Including Rona Graff, you mentioned?
Yes.
And I think you said this morning that your perception of that relationship was one of mutual respect between President Trump and Ms. Graff.
Absolutely.
She had a pretty big job there too, right?
Yes. I really looked up to Rona.
And I think you said this morning she was crucial.
She was, yes.
And so she had people helping her, staff of her own, and right?
She did, yeah.
And that included Meredith McIlver?
Yes.
Ms. McIlver was one of President Trump's ghostwriters.
That's true.
Did the Trump Organization have a legal department?
Yes.
And Al Garton was there when you were there?
Yes.
You had plenty of interactions with him?
Yes.
And Jason Greenblatt?
Yes.
You mentioned interacting with Mr. Cohen pre-campaign of the Trump org this morning?
Yes.
And tell me if I am wrong, it sounded like those interactions were pretty minimal.
Yes.
I think you mentioned a little bit of assistance with the licensing aspects of the hotel deal.
I think that was my only experience working with him unrelated to his interest in the political operation.
And so let's talk a little bit about the campaign. Okay, your title was press secretary, right?
Yes.
And it sounded like your duties and responsibilities morphed onto the new job in a way that sort of carried on what you were doing for President Trump at Trump.org. A little bit, just in a different context, not only real estate and hotels, similar tactics, more politics, less hotels,
Yes.
but still interacting with the press,
Yes.
helping to put together statements, correct?
Yes.
And let's focus on the period 2015 to 2016 for a little bit. Mr. Cohen wasn't a part of the campaign, right?
No. He would try to insert himself at certain moments, but he wasn't supposed to be on the campaign in any official capacity. There were some things he did in a voluntary capacity because of his interest. He would sometimes appear on TV. I think he put together a coalition, a diversity coalition at one point. No, he wasn't looped in on the day-to-day of the campaign strategy. Staff, the plans, no.
The campaign had separate counsel, separate lawyers,
Yes.
and that included Don McGahn?
Yes.
And you mentioned that had Mr. Cohen made some of the statements and did some TV appearances during the campaign, right?
Yes.
And am I correct that he was instructed to focus on President Trump's business credentials, right?
Yes.
And even in connection with that authorization, he was speaking as a campaign surrogate, not a part of the campaign, correct?
That's right. He was speaking as an employee of the Trump Organization that had experience working with Mr. Trump.
Right. In 2015 and 2016, that's where he still worked?
Yes.
And there were times when he did things that, in a sense, that were frustrating to the campaign staff, right?
Yes.
Things that were unauthorized by the campaign, right?
Yes.
He went rouge at times, fair to say?
Yes.
There were times where Mr. Cohen did things that you felt were not helpful to what you were trying to accomplish, right?
Yes. I used to say that he liked to call himself a fixer or Mr. Fix-It. And it was only because he first broke it that he was able to come and fix it.
Right. And he was really just a lawyer, right?
Yes.
A lawyer at Trump.org, right?
Yes.
And you were asked some questions both this morning and this afternoon about David Pecker, right?
Yes.
And you had met David Pecker before joining Trump.org, briefly, correct?
Yes.
And so you had a sense of who he was, right?
Uh-huh.
And you mentioned overhearing some telephone calls between President Trump and Mr. Pecker. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And these things happened a long time ago, right?
Yes, a very long time ago.
And you explained as best you could your memory of those calls, right?
Yes.
And what I want to understand is it wasn't uncommon for President Trump to be speaking to journalists during the campaign, right?
No.
And so those two calls didn't stick out to you as being out of the ordinary, correct?
No.
President Trump gives a lot of feedback, right?
He does. He likes to call and praise people for stories even if they're not about him. just if he thought it was a good story. He likes to call and say when he didn't think it was a good story. He does a really nice job of maintaining relationships and, always being willing to engage with the media even if he doesn't always think that the treatment he gets is fair. He still is willing to engage. So yeah, he spoke often with publishers, journalists, editors.
And he spoke to those types of folks about stories that he liked, right?
Yes.
And ones that he didn't like?
Yes.
And in your experience, it's not uncommon for a campaign to try and work with the media to promote their campaign theme?
No, I wouldn't have a job if that wasn't a regular practice.
Right, it's regular practice, and there's nothing wrong with that, is there?
No.
And campaigns try to do social media to amplify some of those themes that are in their theme, right?
Yes.
The ones they like, right?
Yes.
And sometimes campaigns amplify narratives that are positive for their candidate, correct?
Yes.
And vice versa, sometimes the campaign amplifies the negative with respect to the opponent?
Yes.
Sometimes the campaign spends dollars to do that from social media?
Right.
These are all normal, commonplace ways that campaigns operate, right?
I've only been on one campaign, but it was a great one, and that is my understanding.
And it's consistent. That experience is consistent with the consulting work you are doing right now, right?
I don't have a ton of political clients, but I understand what you are trying to say. It's just not something I am practicing right now.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Public figures think about the issues in the same way, right?
Yes?
Let's talk a little bit about what life was like day to day on the campaign trail, okay? It sounded like long days, right?
Yes.
I think you said you were traveling almost every day.
Yes?
Did you travel with a laptop?
I did, yes.
And also your cell phone?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that you were sending hundreds, if not thousands, of messages each day in this period, 2015 to 2016, because of how hectic things were?
Yes.
And so we've looked at 10-ish of your emails over a 2-year period working on the campaign, right?
Yes.
There were many other issues that came up, correct?
Yes.
And it was common in this period, especially in 2016, as you got towards the election, for there to be outreach from the press about potentially negative stories relating to your candidate, President Trump, right?
Yes.
And obviously you talked today about a couple of those stories, right?
Yes.
But this was near constant, correct?
Yes.
And the two that we focused on so far are the Access Hollywood tape, right? And then these Wall Street Journal articles about Ms. McDougall and Ms. Clifford, right?
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about when that Access Hollywood tape came out. I think you said that you first got wind of it on a sort of Friday night when you were at Trump Tower during the debate prep.
It was Friday afternoon, 1:30.
Thank you. And people were there getting ready for the debate, that right?
Yes.
It was sort of your normal goal to report on developments like that, right?
Yes.
And people were together because of the debate prep.
That's right.
And the president was there for the debate prep, right?
Yes.
And so there was an in-person meeting to discuss how to react to this news article, right?
That's right.
That concept of gathering the key campaign staff and the president to talk about an issue that could impact the campaign, that was standard for the way you were all operating at the time, right?
I mean, most often when we were on the road, it was just whoever was with us.
Right?
It was unusual to be at Trump Tower.
And what was unusual about it is that for once out of all that time you were actually in New York, not on the road, people had gathered for the debate prep, right?
Yes.
You recall, don't you, there was some leaks of President Trump's tax information prior to this?
I think just before the first debate.
And in connection with that, the campaign staff gathered to talk about how to respond with the president, right? Either physically or on the phone.
That's my recollection, yes.
And that Friday night into the Saturday morning, people worked pretty late, right?
Yes.
And I think we looked at President Trump's statement that ended up being October 8th. It was after midnight on October 8th.
Yes, that's right.
He stayed there late to put that together, correct?
He did.
You had a sense, didn't you, that this was causing him personal stress, right?
Yes. Yes, he was worried about how this would be viewed at home.
And you said a little bit ago you got a chance to meet President Trump's wife during your work at Trump.org and also on the campaign?
Yes.
What about your observations of that relationship caused you to think that night this was causing him stress about what would happen at home?
President Trump really values Mrs. Trump's opinion, and she doesn't weigh in all the time. But when she does, it's really meaningful to him. And you know, he really, really respects what she has to say. So I think he was just concerned about what her perception of this would be. And yeah, I know that was weighing on him.
Weighing on him that night, right? And it continued to weigh on him as more allegations were made in the media, right?
Yes.
Now, I think you said that he talked to Mr. Cohen the following day?
Yes.
And to be clear, Mr. Cohen wasn't in any of the meetings at Trump Tower, right?
No.
Wasn't even in the United States, correct?
No.
He was in London?
I think so.
And as best you can recall, on a day that happened a long time ago, it seemed like the focus of your conversations that day were on concerns about a different tape, right?
That's right.
And I think we can call it an alleged tape, right?
Yes.
Alleged because you later confirmed that it didn't exist?
That's right.
And that day, you reached out to Mr. Cohen because you knew that he had a relationship with someone who might be able to find out more information about this alleged tape, right?
Yes, that's right.
The relationship that we're talking about is with a member of the media, correct?
Yes.
And it sounded like maybe the Access Hollywood tape came up, but the focus of the conversations with Mr. Cohen that day with you were on this other issue?
Yes. I think it would have been odd to talk and not acknowledge, the news cycle of the past 24 hours. That wasn't the purpose of the call or what we spoke about.
I want to jump ahead a little bit to the November 4th, 2016 Wall Street Journal article. I think you said that was the first time you heard Karen McDougall's name?
Yes.
And I think you said this morning that it was the second time you remember hearing Stormy Daniels' name?
That's right.
Because you referenced the conversation that you had overheard on a plane, I think around November 2015?
That's right.
And I just need to clarify that that conversation related to, it involved President Trump, right? He was there on the plane?
He was on the plane, yes.
But still interacting with the press?
Yes, that's right.
You talked about when the article, the November 4th, 2016 article came out, that President Trump asked that the newspapers not be brought to the residence that day.
Yes.
And that was another indication, wasn't it, that this was hitting home in a very real way?
Yes.
That there were parts of this that were very, very personal to him, right?
Absolutely. I don't think he wanted to. I don't think he wanted anyone in his family to be hurt or embarrassed by anything that was happening on the campaign. He wanted them to be proud of him.
The last thing I want to do is talk a little bit about your time in the White House. You described some conversations with President Trump that I think you said happened in 2018, right?
Yes.
And you were there that day. You were working, right?
Yes.
In your official capacity, right?
Yes.
And he was there trying to be president of the United States, right?
Yes.
And that office that you described, the Oval Office and the area around it, that was a very hectic space in 2017, right?
Yes.
And it sounds like for a period of time when you had that job, you could see from where you were sitting the Resolute desk.
Yes.
That's where the president sat?
Yes.
When he was acting as president, right?
That's right.
So you got a sense of how chaotic that environment was day to day, right?
Uh-huh. That particular area wasn't necessarily chaotic in a bad way. I just want to clarify, it was very busy. There was a lot going on. There were certainly parts of the experience that were chaotic, but he was constantly moving.
People were working very hard to make it not chaotic and keep it orderly?
Yes.
But the fact is there were many meetings and a lot going on, right?
Yes.
And from where you sat, you could see that the president was frequently multitasking, right?
Yes.
And people were interrupting what he was doing, right?
Yes.
Different priorities would get called out to his attention, and he would pivot.
That's right.
And in that time frame, in 2017, while you were focused on your job at the White House, you didn't have anything to do with the business records of the Trump org. 200 plus miles away from New York City, did you?
No.
I have nothing further.
Anything else?
1 minute to confer, Your Honor.
Sure.
Attorneys conferring.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Ms. Hicks. You can step out.
Witness excused.